Wonderful. So how's everyone going today? Doing well? Yeah, look, this is the most anticipated and exciting session that we're going to have in the whole symposium, okay? We're finally going to hear the student voice, and after all, that's what it's about. It's about putting our students at the heart, at the centre of our future-focused universities that will become, and increasingly become, equitable spaces and universities for all. So my name's Maria Raciti, and I'm the moderator, and my colleague, everyone's colleague, Sally, is also going to join, sharing some insights as well as helping ask questions as well and field questions. I'd like to welcome all people who are online as well. Now, in the room today, there are a number of students, and there's also students online. So while we have 4 students with us, I'd also encourage the other students who are participating today to feel free to share their knowledge, their perspectives, their experiences as we move throughout the session today. I think this is such an exciting part because it's not only about centering the needs of students, but the dreams of students, so that we can remain contemporary and keep evolving with the changing world that's around us. So on that note, I will introduce our 4 students. I have a brief bio for each, so forgive me as I read each. So next to me, first off, is Tayla. So Tayla was a member of the Ministerial Reference Group for the Australian Universities Accord. Growing up in Streaky Bay, 700 kilometres from Adelaide, led to her advocacy for rural students. She became a Rural Youth Ambassador in 2020, advocating for changes to rural students in schools. Tayla relocated to Adelaide in 2022 to commence her studies in medicine at Flinders University. So welcome, Tayla. Next along, we have Kathleen. Now, Kathleen Nelly is a Yamada Noongar Aboriginal woman who lives on Whadjuk land in Boorloo, Perth. Kathleen is in her 3rd year of business, studying anthropology, international business and sociology at Curtin University. She spent most of her life studying and working in Western Australia's Midwest region of Geraldton and also lived briefly in Pilbara. She works as a project officer on the Cultural Capabilities team at Curtin University and is student representative of the Curtin Indigenous Leadership Group and a student representative on the ACSES Advisory Board. Next along, we have Evie. Evie Ganon. Evie is a Canberrian. I struggled that I was going to say that word wrong. Who is passionate about disability rights and systemic advocacy. Evie grew up in Perth and is currently studying a Masters of Disability and Inclusion at Deakin University. Evie spent 3 years working as an inclusion practitioner for ANU and the ACT government and is now working as an independent community engagement and inclusion practitioner. She is Deputy Chair of Children and Young People with Disability in Australia and co-authored the report What Young People Said, Tertiary Education and Learning, which documents the experiences of young university students with disability. Next along, we have Dylan Storer. So Dylan is a youth advocate, broadcaster and environmentalist. Dylan was raised in the Kimberley. He's committed to working to make sure that the voices of the future are not left out of the present. Dylan has worked with the ABC, Guardian Australia, and was the 2021 North Australian Liaison for the Australian Youth Representative to the United Nations. Dylan is currently the president of the UN Youth WA, works with WA's peak environmental organisation, and represents the interests of students as a member of the Curtin Student Guild Council. So let's get this party started, hey? Okay? So on that note, I'm going to invite each of our panellists to share their experiences. The topic was around the challenges and opportunities with it that shape student success within university and beyond. So it's quite a wide net that we're casting. And I'd like to make sure that at this stage that in many ways we get out of the road of students and let them speak uninterrupted and have this as a platform. And as I mentioned, I encourage students online and also in the room to contribute to this discussion. So to kick things off, Kathleen.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Wasn't expecting that. Thank you. I'm Kathleen Yamaji Noongar from Western Australia. I'm currently studying 3rd year of Commerce, International Business and Anthropology and Sociology. Yeah. Thinking about challenges to student success in university, one of my first challenges that I can think of sort of reminds me back to 3 years before considering university, is the stigma around what university is for Aboriginal people, just in terms of knowing that it was not an institution that many Aboriginal people had access to. So I had a big challenge in terms of dealing with and understanding whether or not I even wanted to apply to university, because I had no idea. I had nobody in my family that had went to university. I am first in family, but I'm not just first in family for university. I'm first in family to graduate high school. My grandparents never graduated high school. My mother didn't, my dad didn't, so just addressing that to begin with was a big challenge for me, just in terms of whether or not I would fit in a university. I didn't even know what the institution was. So, I mean, to me that was a big challenge. And then while at university, just struggling to find a sense of belonging, that was one of the biggest challenges that I faced in terms of my first year, partially because I never met another Aboriginal student for 6 months that I first started studying. And so that was quite a challenge. And then from then on, I sort of took more of an initiative to want to get more involved and to really try and improve my own experience, but as well as others. And then from then on, I think most of my challenges sort of relate to cultural safety at university, knowing that it's not a key principle that's quite addressed in universities, let alone any institute related for students in education. I know that it's also in primary school, it wasn't necessarily really supportive and things like that. And so, yeah, to me, there's a lot of different challenges for an Aboriginal person in university. Most of it's related to systematic things that you can't change, but other of it is related to the actual student experience that I had.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Tayla, would you like to share?
Yeah, thank you. So I've grown up in Streaky Bay, which is an 8-hour drive west of Adelaide. It has a population of about 1,000 people, and I was one of 8 Year 12 students in my class. Due to my small class size, that meant I had to undertake 3 of my Year 12 subjects online through neighbouring schools. So they provided chemistry, nutrition and biology to me, and the teacher from nearby school, say 3 hours away, would come to visit my school to do practicals. So this was one of the first challenges that I experienced when trying to pursue higher education. And then throughout Year 12, I worked really hard and applied for medicine at Flinders University and was lucky enough to get an offer there. And was very fortunate that I was able to meet these prerequisites thanks to collaboration from the neighbouring schools. Now, I do want to become a rural generalist once I graduate, so I can give back to the communities and move home to the country. So that's my end goal. But I've also been involved with a lot of student advocacy, as Maria mentioned. So I was the rural student representative on the Ministerial reference group for the Accord, and also helped to run Rural Youth Ambassadors, which is a leadership program for rural Year 11 students. Now, my biggest takeaway from this array of experiences would be, how can we ensure that country kids dream big? And once they realise these dreams, how can we help them to get there? So in my opinion, all of this links back to aspirations, which was a huge discussion point for yesterday, and I think it's one of the key takeaways from the Accord report as well. And if you check the Accord, it all links to recommendation 11. So the first issue, in my opinion, starts with, you can't be what you can't see. So when you grow up in these rural communities, say if you're from an agricultural community, people just assume you're going to become a farmer and work on mum and dad's farm, or a mining community, you might feel confined to working in the mines. And this lack of exposure can be really damaging, because country kids don't know that they could make an amazing astrophysicist, but if you don't know what that is, it's pretty hard to become one. Then the second issue, so once you've realised what your dream is, how do we support them to get where they need to be? So for example, my barrier was subjects. I couldn't meet those prerequisites, but there's so many other challenges that those students have to face. So for example, relocation for uni, if you're pursuing higher education, or whether you study through a regional university centre, how do you integrate yourself into the community there and feel like you belong, as Kathleen said? And once you do relocate, how do you manage the cost of living with things such as working part-time or full-time, trying to adjust without having family, not knowing anyone, and if that wasn't enough, you're trying to grapple with moving to a brand new environment where you don't know a single person. Who can I go to? Where's my support? Now, thankfully, we have seen a lot of solutions come out of the Accord, which has been really amazing to see. So I think the needs-based funding is a really important one to make sure the students who need that money are getting it. It's the same with the student income support and the paid placements. Now, I'm also involved with a concept called Journey Mates, which connects young people to young people who are already in their ideal pathway. So this is something that I'm involved with already. So I'm a mentor for Year 12 students from across the country who are wanting to pursue medicine. And I'm just there as a friend and a mentor to give them advice about how to get into their pathway. So, for example, where to go for UCAT training, which is an aptitude test. How do I apply? If I get an offer, where do I look for scholarships? Where should I live? Do I live on campus? What do I bring to my dorm room? How do I navigate my way to my classes? Cheers. How do I navigate my way to my classroom? So having that one-on-one support that's genuine and knowing that they have someone there for them, I think really, really helps. And this concept is something that links directly back to recommendation 11C. If you want to look that up in the Accord, I think it's an idea that will definitely help integrate that into the system. Now, I've also heard a lot about hitting attainment targets over the last day or so, and I just want to remind you all that we students, we aren't just a number, we're actually living the reality, and we can't succeed with no support. So yes, it's all well and good if you send us to university, but you guys are the ones that need to support us to make sure we are staying in uni and not having a lack of support and then dropping out within the 6 months. You guys need to help see us through to the end to complete our degrees.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Next along is Evie.
Thanks, Maria. So as Maria mentioned, I grew up in Perth. I moved to Canberra 2 weeks after I turned 18 to attend ANU for my undergraduate degree, and I'm now still living in Canberra, but I'm studying at Deakin University online, doing my thesis in the experience of students with disability at university. Over the last couple of years, aside from my student experience, I've also worked at the Australian National University, at Deakin and at UNSW Canberra as well, in varying roles across research communications and equity and diversity practice. So I'm a bit of a university reforms nerd, and I think I'm not sure I know many other autistic people for whom their special interest is university structure and university reform. So I don't know if that's a good thing, but at any rate, it means that I have been following the Accord very closely. And I suppose to zoom back from that and from my personal experience and to look at what's happening more broadly in the disability sector, because I know that some of the media coverage around that hasn't really permeated the mainstream. So at the moment, we're in the process of seeing the government response to the NDIS review, which was a big review of the NDIS commissioned to look at how the scheme is working, whether or not it's fulfilling its originally stated aims, where things are working well, where things perhaps aren't working so well. The report was handed down at the end of last year. We've started to see some response to that in the recent budget. But the big themes around that are, of course, the growth rate of the scheme. Some people say that that's growing too quickly. Other things are around provider registration. But a big thing that I think is quite relevant to us here in the tertiary sector is obviously the relationship between tertiary education attendance and then subsequent employment. And for people with disability for whom their goals are to attend university and then to proceed to employment, or perhaps to just attend university because going to university is great and fun and learning is excellent, there aren't necessarily the services in the support coordination or in the service provider landscape to be able to provide that advice, I suppose, around how do you get to university, what skills do I need to develop, what do I need to change about the way the university is working to enable my success? Because it's not always about the students changing themselves and improving their skills. In a lot of cases, it's about the universities improving their capacity and improving their skills. In addition to the NDIS review, we've obviously recently completed the Disability Royal Commission, and that was a really massive multi-year piece of work that involved thousands of people with disability sending in their insights. The Royal Commission culminated in a giant stack of reports. It's 15 volumes, it weighs about 15 kilos, and I have all 15 kilos of it at home. So it doesn't really fit very well in my bookcase, but it'll find a pride of place eventually, I hope. But in that 15 kilos of Royal Commission report, aside from references and appendices, the word university appears only once. And it appears in a conversation, in a submission that a mother made in support of her daughter with disability. And she was reflecting on her aspiration for her daughter to be able to go through her high school and attend university with her friends. And I think the absence of discussion of tertiary education in the Royal Commission tells us a lot in terms of expectations for people with disability. It tells us a lot about the presence of people with disability in those places and how people may or may not have been able to reflect on that experience. Obviously, the Royal Commission was about violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation. And there are a lot of places where that's happening to people with disability to a far greater extent than we could ever possibly say about university. And so it's very understandable that there wasn't a big focus. But I think what we need to take from that is that actually we need to bring disability back into the conversation and really think about how can we change societal attitudes to make every single individual with who has university aspirations, that they can go to university and succeed. I guess reflecting on Minister Clare's comments yesterday, I was really relieved to hear that he recognised that the Accord didn't get everything right about disability. For those who haven't dug into the data, I won't spend too long on it, but one of the key issues in the Accord around disability is that when the participation targets were calculated for students with disability, the base or population rate that was used, that was calculated out of a sample that had removed the experiences of people with profound disability. Profound disability is defined by the Survey of Disability and Carers. It's an ABS survey and they've got very sort of bureaucratic definitions, but functionally what that means is people who need significant support with any daily living task, they fall into that profound disability category. Anyone who might be a wheelchair user, who is profoundly deaf, anyone who needs significant support with some of those daily living activities, which may have absolutely nothing to do with their university aptitude, they were removed from that sample. And as a result, we don't have an aspirational participation target for students with disability in the Accord. I'm not sure if you've noticed. Apparently we're doing fine. And when I reflect on what I hear from my peers, when I reflect on what I hear in my organisation, Children and Young People with Disability Australia, things are not fine. There's a lot of work to be done. And so I hope that we can talk about some of those things today, some of those things that need to be done. But I suppose my overall message is that I really hope that we are ready to work on things, not just that are in the Accord, but also the things that are perhaps missing from the Accord. We've heard that the Accord is the roadmap. Minister Clare said yesterday, the roadmap for the next 15 years or so in universities. But I really hope that we can add other journeys and other little stops along the way on that roadmap, because we're going to miss a lot of things if we're narrowly focused just on what's on the Accord.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evie. And Dylan.
Yeah, hard acts to follow. A lot's been said. I mean, I grew up in the Kimberley, small town called Fitzroy Crossing. in the central Kimberley there, about 2,000 people in town and then the surrounding remote communities. I went to school at the local public school and did a lot of units online through distance education as well to supplement that. And probably suffered because of that as well. I'm really bad at maths. I used to be really good at maths when I was younger. I sort of unlearned that going through school there. I do think there is a problem with sort of criminally low levels of expectation for kids from the bush, First Nations kids from the bush especially, but also kids in outer suburban areas, places like this, places in Perth like Mirrabooka or Balga, places, like Ellenbrook, places where, we sort of say, well, we might take a couple of students from here, but more or less our students come from rich schools, and they come from schools that are relatively more well off. I ended up doing a different alternate pathway to university, so I didn't actually graduate high school. I don't have a WA Certificate of Education or an ATAR. Again, I guess it sort of comes back to, on paper, I'm a failure of the public education system. I got an alternative entry actually to Wollongong University. I moved over east for that. Unfortunately, I moved in 2020, so I came back to WA before the borders closed. Otherwise, I'd probably still be in New South Wales. But I think it was a good decision for me at the time. And I applied for one of those institutions of excellence we heard of yesterday. One of the group of 8 unis, one of them in WA. I wonder which one. But I turned that down. And I turned that down to go to Curtin University for the same reason I decided to go to Wollongong University, because I really want to be a part of a university that feels like it's for the people, feels like it's more connected to community, feels like that it's more driven by purpose more than about raising money and having beautiful sandstone buildings. Curtin has some wonderful brick buildings. And they are glorious. So no, that was sort of the reason why I decided to go to Curtin. Look, I think broadly there's a lot of difficulties that exist when it comes to equity in these spaces, and I do feel weird, even though it's probably true, sitting here and listening. Being a kid from the bush, am I really an equity student? And I feel a little bit uncomfortable when people say that, and when sort of listening to panels yesterday sort of say, we've got students and we've got equity students. So we're all just students. We all want a decent, fair go. We all want to have a really good time at university. We want to get as much as we can out of that experience. I think universities have a very large perception problem. I think a lot of it is grounded in a sense of reality, and that's sort of the sense of, since the 80s, Australia and the Western world and much of the world's headed down a more neoliberal path. The university sector's responded to that in the way in which you were supposed to. You've responded in a way, the whole of the economy's responded, which is, instead of looking at things as an intrinsic value for society, we've been forced to look at things as what it adds to the economy. And that, I think, has created a lot of difficulties for the university. I think you'd struggle to find a student in any institution of higher education in the country that thinks that they're there for students, they're there for educational purposes. For most people, first and foremost, they imagine the university's there to get money. A bit of paper is sort of what you get at the end. Obviously, you can have different perception as whether or not that's true. Again, I think a lot of the facts sort of point to the fact that it's sort of grounded in a pretty decent level of truth at the moment. I think the Accord is a really good way of us trying to claw that back. But that's certainly a perception that exists out there, that students are just numbers on paper, that they are, X amount of hundreds of dollars per unit you sign up to, and that's all that really matters. And if you tick the boxes, you'll get your piece of paper at the end of the day, and you'll be gone. Which isn't what university is really for. I mean, I've got far more out of university from being involved in the community that happens around university, having that opportunity to explore new things, having that opportunity to dip my toes in areas where I wouldn't have traditionally thought of. You know, I started off doing international relations. I quickly learned that was a mistake. I studied journalism. I'm doing various different units in arts. That's sort of the beauty of a humanities degree, but then there are differences that can happen in the various degrees that people go down, the pace that they go down at, whether they do full-time the whole time, whether they do what I've done, and it's a mixture of full-time and part-time, and picking up other experiences that exist around your time at university. I think that's where WA is probably quite a bit different to a lot of other places. Obviously, I'll say this, I'm a student unionist, I'm on the University Guild Council for Curtin, but the structure of how our student unions work in WA sort of force that collaboration between the student unions and the university. It's embedded into the Act that establishes the university, so it's not something that can be defunded, it's not something where we can set up a separate, you know, sort of university-run institution that delivers what a student union would traditionally deliver. And that's going to be messy, there's going to be tension, that's fine, that's, you know, if it's not about tension, I don't know what, you know, higher education and university is supposed to be about. It's always going to be a tense, there's always going to be disagreements, but that is what this space is supposed to be about. But it does give students a level of equity in the same way that staff have through sort of industrial arrangements to be able to negotiate with university, to be able to bring issues forward in a way that can't be easily dismissed as it is in a lot of other institutions in the country where student unions aren't sort of as embedded into the fabric. So that's where, sort of coming out of this budget, the 40% SAF, which is lower than what we've got in WA, but sort of a minimum for student-led organisations, I think is going to be quite powerful for a lot of institutions around the country, where we're giving sort of that power back a little bit to the students to sort of deliver those services around what happens at university in terms of student assist, in terms of advocacy, but also in terms of those clubs and events and things that make university special, and the things that stick with you when you leave university, and those connections and communities. Young people experiencing sort of the highest levels of loneliness in history at the moment, and I experienced that when I started university. Coming from a country area, I didn't have those sort of connections that existed in Perth. But I was able to overcome that by getting involved with things like clubs, with things at university, to build those connections. And that's been really important and critical to sort of my development. Not more so, but I'd say equally so as my degree. So I do sort of reject a little bit what the Senator said earlier today, which is the focus should just be on getting jobs. I think that's a really shallow understanding of what our sector can achieve and the benefit that we provide to students, to citizens of Australia, but also citizens right around the world, when we're sort of talking about this international educational system and how we as a sector can really be a powerful progressive force for long-term societal advancement in our region and in our country.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Thank you. And across to Sally.
So I'm not a student, but I'm the mother of students. I suppose I'm a student of higher education, but I just think we should stop for this to say thank you to our 4 amazing students for their eloquent advocacy, for their passion and commitment, and thank you for coming along today. I think this is going to be a really rich discussion. I'm probably going to bring the tone down because I want to make 3 points that in response to what the students have said. The first one is something that doesn't seem to get much airplay, and I don't think we've heard the word curriculum so far over the course of this day and a half. So inclusive curriculum design. The Accord acknowledged that we needed to upskill our own workforce in terms of how we're going to respond to an expanded sector, to increasing student diversity. We need to change our curriculum and learning and teaching approaches to make sure that all students feel welcome and can see themselves in the curriculum and see and be able to negotiate and navigate their way through the curriculum, because a lot of that goes then to mental health and wellbeing. The Accord also, there's some wonderful statements in the Accord that they want learning and teaching excellence and for us to move beyond the threshold standards approach to curriculum and learning and teaching. And they asked the question in the interim report, what would it take for us to strive for excellence and move beyond a minimalist approach? And now they've started quoting the Productivity Commission about the laggards in universities that are holding that back. So as Vincent Tinto says, and we've heard that, resource to that a couple of times over the course of this day, access without support is not opportunity. And Tinto also says we can't leave student success to chance. So for me, that means we need to embed equity in all of our institutional remits, and I would of course say in particular in learning and teaching and curriculum design. What that actually means is embracing universal design for learning, and I acknowledge that we've got ADSET in the room, the Australian Disability Clearinghouse, who runs amazing webinars and resources around universal design for learning. You know, I would challenge each of you to go back to your institutions and understand whether your practitioner teachers know what that would look like. I might also say transition pedagogy, but I'm quoting Verity Firth rather than myself in that instance, so I thank Verity for calling that out. And enabling also the physical and virtual environment that students need to be successful. So to be absolutely clear, what I'm talking about is scaffolded, coherent, quality learning experiences embedded in the curriculum, where we also embed the generic and discipline-specific skills and literacies that all students need to be successful in their discipline, that we do, and we heard the students just speak about it, relationship-rich, channeling Leo Lambert and Peter Felton, relationship-rich education for a sense of belonging and mattering, and that we don't require students to fit in to the university. We actually meet them and adapt to who they are. And I would also say that we proactively manage for students the many micro and macro transitions they make over the course of the student life cycle, in, through and out, between subjects, between different teachers, between different years. You know, we could go on with that. Because I would also say that the many support for student policy issues that we saw raised at the end of last year and the beginning of this year are matters that could actually be managed proactively with wraparound support in embedded curriculum design. And there would be triggers in that embedded curriculum design that allows us to proactively then reach out for students to offer support. How would we do this, you ask? Well, we do whole of institution approaches. So Omar yesterday was talking about the Office for Students access and participation plans. I've just done some work with Liz Thomas in the UK. It's my understanding that the access and participation plans in the Office for Students require the evaluation of, and they've got an acronym for it, WPA, whole provider approaches. We're not good at whole of institution approaches. We need to make sure, and I've got a big curriculum redesign table, that we've got all the academic and professional staff around the curriculum redesign table with our agentic students who can co-create and co-design with their lived experience. So that, you know, why would we try to do others? So that was my first supposedly quick point. My second quicker point is something that I'm very grateful to Barney Glover for raising every time he spoke over the course of the last couple of days, and that's our critical need for a national framework for quality careers advising across the lifespan. And I think we got a bit of that from what the students said. I'm just going to give you a litany of failures on this. So the Productivity Commission in 2017 called out the confusing maze, and listen to that, of career information advice that was scattered all over the internet, essentially, and said we needed to do something about that for both young people and for mature age students. The Higher Education Standards Panel in 2017 similarly said that, in recommendation 2, that school students and mature age students needed to get better careers advice, and we could do something about that, but something general needed to happen. And they looked to the National Career Education Strategy that was being delivered in 2018 for that response. The Joyce Review of Vocational Education in 2019 also called the careers information a confusing maze, and said it led to skills mismatches, wasted course subsidies and poorer outcomes for individuals. They hoped with their recommendation of a National Careers Institute that would be fixed, and that happened, but I don't think it's fixed because Shergold in 2020 on the senior secondary also called out the confusing maze of careers advice. 63% of school students said they did not have enough information about post-secondary options. 63%. NAPTINE, which I know the NAPTINE Review of Rural, Regional, Remote Students that I know Maria was involved in, also recommended improved careers advice. And this year we've had the House of Representatives Committee on Perceptions of VET that delivered its report in February 2024, saying that they didn't think the National Careers Institute was functioning optimally, and said that there should be a national career strategy for schools starting with primary, and I think Barney mentioned that at the dinner last night, and then our own universities accord. And thank you, I think it was Tayla or Kathleen mentioned recommendation 11. So go and have a look at recommendation 11, because the Accord said that, again, we needed a consistent national framework for careers advice across all life stages, with post-secondary pathways visible and integrated into secondary schooling. So there's a critical piece. We are not going to make a difference here unless we get the careers advising. So curriculum, careers advising, there's 2 C's. I can't do I'll create credit transfers. So my third one is, I just got there. Look at me, Kathy. Alliteration. So we need also a national recognition of prior learning, recognition of prior experience framework. The Accord called that out as not working, as we did on the Australian Qualifications Framework Review, and there are numerous reasons for that, and I'm very happy to entertain you with them, should we need it. But what we need to is improve that credit transfer and recognition of prior learning and experience to enable student mobility to enter, exit and re-enter education in accordance with what their vision of success is and what they can manage in accordance with their complex and complicated lives. The AQF review also said that we needed a common credit point system to enable some sort of trading currency around credit. Again, in addition to the national policy framework not having been progressed, even though we've got a national micro-credentials framework, we have not progressed the common credit framework. And I leave you with this one thought. The Australian Bureau of Statistics Qualifications and Work Survey that was released in April of this year said that in 2022 to 2023, 2.9 million, or 15% of 15 to 40 to 74-year-olds, 2.9 million, 15% is probably all I needed to say there, have incomplete non-school qualifications, 46% of them within the last 10 years. And so if we're talking about learning that's not being recognised or harnessed or leveraged going forward, we could do something about that. So I'm sorry if that took too long, but I hope that was responsive. So put in your Slido questions. We've now got the luxury of a considerable period of time to ask our students what they think, and I hope that some of that met the matters that the students raised.
So while people are doing that, I might ask the panel a question. Everybody was here yesterday. So what did you learn yesterday that surprised you? Tayla, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I'd love to. So yesterday I learnt about the ATEC. I knew it was already a thing. However, I wasn't aware of the Implementation Advisory Committee. Now, I got a bit excited and searched up, who's on this committee? And I was pretty disappointed to find out there are no student representatives. So I think that's a really huge thing that we need to consider. Yes, we may not be able to write a policy in the formal language that we need, but even if we aren't on that committee, I'd love to see student collaboration, consult, as much involvement as possible with that committee, because my biggest question is, like, why aren't students leading this conversation? We've clearly got the lived experience, and I'm sure these other students here have just blown your absolute socks off. I know they have with me. So, yeah, I think that people like this need to be leading this.
Thank you. Kathleen?
pretty much the same. I too saw that and looked at it last night. Yeah, pretty much the same. I think another factor for me yesterday was learning about language and learning about the terminology in the different languages that we have been using in university. I know when I first went and entered university, there were so many acronyms, so many different concepts, so many different things that existed, and I thought, why is there no consistency between coming from high school into coming to university, and why we're not using the same languages, and all the talk about attainment. I just think that's it's a good thing, like talking about attaining, but also there's so many other concepts that we use for attainment, such as dreaming and what that means for Indigenous people. I know as an Indigenous person coming into university, I had no idea what attainment even meant. So in terms of trying to ask about aspirations and dreams and things like that, for Indigenous kids, these aren't words that we know. These are words used in a classroom where we use words in the bush. And so just in terms of inclusive language at university, there's so many different words that exist that have no meaning to students. So that was a real highlight for me yesterday.
Wonderful. Evie, what did you learn yesterday that surprised you?
I was really interested to learn about the UK's framework for holding universities accountable for actually implementing measurable mechanisms and actions to improve equity. I just think that's something that's really, really missing from our regulatory framework. In my experience as a diversity and inclusion practitioner at a university, and I'm not sure if others share this experience, but I feel like we're constantly working on this litany of different accreditation systems. We've got Sage Athena Swan over here. We've got the Australian Workplace Equality Index over here. We've got the Australian Disability Network Inclusive Employers Index over here. It's just a huge hodgepodge, and we've got hundreds of working groups with hundreds of people contributing so many hours towards strategies that are not joined up together, that are not unified, that artificially separate the staff and the student experience from each other. And I just think that having a central obligation to need to report in one place along a medium to long-term strategy about what universities are actually doing to improve the state of inclusion across all different experiences. And I too share the view that I try not to use equity groups as a kind of classifier. For me, I prefer to use things that use collective words that involve verbs, like underserved groups, because actually it's not us that is the commodity, it's universities that have underserved us, and it's the system that has created these categories of marginalised and non-marginalised. It's not inherent to us. So yeah, I think I was really interested to hear about the UK system, Omar, and I'm naively optimistic about potential opportunities in the future for Australia to look at putting something in place like that for our institutions, because there is so much goodwill and energy going towards these programs. But equally, as was mentioned yesterday, the theory of change that we're kind of working to here is that if we throw more and more programs in and we throw more money towards these programs and we do adjustments, that everything's going to be okay. And maybe it will. That would be nice. It wasn't okay for me, but maybe it will be okay for other people. But having an imperative to actually measure, prove that things are effective, and where things are effective, resource them. Don't just let them trundle along when they're being really effective and not ramp them up and find those economies of scale to expand them to different student groups and different staff groups. Yeah, thanks for that, Omar.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evie. And Dylan, what did you learn yesterday that surprised you?
Yeah, I learned a lot about data and how important data is. And it is important, but I do think that we run the risk of becoming bean counters in this front. So yeah, I'm not saying don't get rid of the data. I think the data is really important. And having good quality data that you can measure over a long period of time. But I think actually listening to students to sort of get that full understanding what's behind the data. So you need that quantitative but also qualitative data and information to sort of feed into decisions that universities make and decisions that government makes. I think one of the reflections from yesterday that I got was that everyone in this room seems sort of broadly in support of the payments for placements. I think it's a really good thing and a really good policy. But it wasn't in a lot of university submissions to the Accord. It wasn't, you know, it was in some, and thank you to those that did put that in there. I know Curtin did. But there's a bit of commentary around it not being enough. I think this is a really big opportunity for universities to step up and actually be seen to fight for students to a degree, particularly in a way that is going to benefit the university as well. You know, we all know, and this goes back to sort of the information. One, this payment's going to be means tested. It's going to be all of these things. We've got a situation, I don't think there's a university in the country where you're not going to enter into housing stress to stay on campus if you're on, you know, I mean, even me at the moment, I'm working a part-time job. I'd be in housing stress if I had to stay on campus in like the cheapest 8-bedroom accommodation. And if I was on something like youth allowance with rent assistance, like that would be over 80%. I did the rough numbers. If I was on youth allowance rent assistance paying for the cheapest accommodation at Curtin Uni, I would have about $50 a week left over before tax. So I don't know how you can sustain that at the moment. So I think like that's sort of the general reflection is one, yes, government needs to take action. There's also a lot of things that the university can do that are outside of just picking a few winners through scholarship programs. It's that sort of long-term equitable system. I think that's the other point, is that I think there is still a big misunderstanding from some institutions represented here of what equity actually means. And I think we're getting equity still confused with equality. And this notion that a rising tide lifts all ships, that's not equity. That's still meaning that the ship that's higher up, I don't know, you know, the biggest ship is going to be higher, if I get my analogy wrong, right? Yeah, well, the bigger ship's still going to be higher and the smaller ship's not going to be. So it is a case of actually equity means, you know, it's not just everyone given the same program, it's actually people being backed up and supported in that way as well. So I think there is a bit of a misunderstanding of what equity means still from some people. Not from everyone. I think there's a lot of goodwill, and that's the other reflection here. I think there is a lot of goodwill to actually work towards. But it's just a case of, you know, when the rubber hits the roadmap, whether we're actually going to continue to deliver or whether we're going to go back and look at the balance sheet and figure out we can make $1 million in savings here, we can do that. And that's what we've seen for the past 30-odd years in the Australian tertiary education system. I think it's up to all of us, you know, chancellors, vice-chancellors, uni councils, senates, all the way down to be making sure that we're actually working collaboratively in a best... Because I can't foresee in another 30 years, if we keep going down the same track at the moment, this sector is going to be hopeless. We're going to go right down a highly corporatised model. It's untenable for institutions that are overwhelmingly in this country public assets to be heading down this path. The Accords are one step for us to sort of stop and figure out, actually, let's reconfigure the role of this entire sector within our society. So yeah, those are a few reflections. There were a few things that surprised me, but yeah.
Thank you, Dylan. We have a question from the floor.
Yes, thank you for that. That was an absolutely outstanding panel, and I really enjoyed everyone's presentations. In particular to Evie, being obviously I've got a guide dog, so I have a particular interest in your area. Well, firstly, if you've got a chance after this, I'd love to catch up for a coffee and share networks, because I think there is a really a growth in staff with disabilities and with students, and there are some, and the space you're in with the PhD I think is a really exciting pathway space which doesn't get enough attention and it should. But if you, on that, you mentioned just then about ramping up programs. Is there one program you think is working and we need to resource, well, not me, because I've got no money, but people that have money should ramp up and resource right now?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's an interesting question. I don't know that I want to go inflating any one university's ego too big, but what I would say about that is that I think there are some universities that are doing, you know, in the disability space, for example, are doing disability support really well. and are getting great outcomes for their students through implementing the disability standards for education properly. There are some universities who are not doing so well, and if you want the blacklist, I can give that to you later on. It's long. So I think in terms of ramping up and resourcing work, I would say that we need to do some evaluation of how universities are delivering their disability services, rewarding the ones that are doing a great job, and actually doing some enforcement around the disability standards for education for those who aren't. All of that said, stepping outside of programs that are delivered by universities, I think possibly the worst news that I've heard in the last 12 months was that the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training is being defunded and is going to revert back to just delivering its clearinghouse imperative, which is effectively online resources. And I wasn't aware of ADSET in my undergraduate years. I didn't know the acronym, I didn't know what they did, and I didn't know how that would affect me. But when I moved into working at universities as a practitioner, I realised that this was an organisation and a program that was delivering incredibly advanced professional development and resources to disability practitioners in the sector. And I'm not sure that all universities understand what this organisation and program is doing for their practitioners, and I'm not sure that universities understand what's going to happen when it goes away and when ADSET's no longer delivering its regular webinars and no longer facilitating practitioner discussions. Because to me, what we really need in this space is professionalisation of disability practice. We need some kind of post-secondary qualification for disability practitioners. It can't just be any old, any ex-teacher or an ex-lecturer or someone who's just passionate about supporting students who goes in and delivers this very, very technical practice of providing adjustments to students with disability and providing supports. And I think that having a professional body that is providing that development and those opportunities like ADSET and is doing that, and also having the ability for practitioners to attend further education about how to do that. We wouldn't have people working as social workers who weren't qualified as social workers. We wouldn't have nurses working who aren't qualified as nurses. So I'm really not quite sure why we have disability practitioners in universities who are not qualified as disability practitioners. Now, the caveat to all of that, there are some fantastic practitioners out there, and shout out to the person who put my EAP together at Deakin. Wow, amazing work. That has not always been my experience at universities though, and I know it's not the experience of a lot of my peers. A lot of our members at CIDA as well have not had a great experience there. So that's a kind of roundabout way of answering your question, Paul, that I think in terms of things that we can ramp up, it's disabilities that are providing these supports and services well, and also not taking away the economies of scale that we get from when we fund organisations like ADSET to deliver these services en masse and pooling expertise together. Because when we take that away and then we direct it into individual needs-based funding pathways, that's obviously really important for other reasons, but we lose those economies of scale, and it means that we start doing everything, we reinvent the wheel every single time for every single student at every single different university. And I know that there's been a lot of commentary about, about waste in the university sector. Don't worry, we talk about waste in the NDIS too, but to me, redoing that process, reinventing the wheel every time, that sounds like waste to me. And if we can get rid of that waste by centralising things and creating economies of scale, then I think that is what we need to be ramping up.
If I might also just add to that, when we're talking about a tertiary education system, again, probably underappreciated, is that ADSET is a tertiary provider in terms of that, in terms of that training, both vocational and higher education. And when you think about the millions of dollars that get into the 24% of students with disability in schools, and then the millions of dollars that get put into workers with disability at the other end, the revolving $150,000 or $160,000 annual thing that has to keep going is a disgrace.
Absolutely, and I think that we talked a lot about I must admit it was the first time I'd heard the word harmonisation said so many times yesterday. But we talk about, cross-sectoral harmonisation and bringing, universities and TAFEs and RTOs together. Organisations like ACSES are already doing that and bringing that kind of experience into the same room and helping vet practitioners work with university practitioners to understand what works. I'm studying my certificate 4 in training and assessment at the moment just because I was interested in learning about the vet sector a bit more. And I sort of thought about maybe in my career in the future, teaching in TAFEs and in vet settings might be something I might like to do. But there are so many incredible things going on in the vet sector that universities can and should be learning from, and vice versa. And it just seems baffling that we're not already doing that. But there are places that are. ACSES is one of them. There are lots of other practitioner groups. EPA has some TAFE-driven members as well, as I understand it. Lots of groups already doing this, and universities really need to get on board and follow that charge in the steps towards doing that harmonisation, which that's now my new favourite word, and I'm just going to say it all the time. So,
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for that. You might want to post that on your website, Darlene.
Thank you, Paul. Just while we tee up another question from the floor, I will read out a question online for the student panel. How might online education affect student engagement and relationships with the university and peers? Anybody like to kick that off?
Not well. I think it's. Look, I mean, I have taken advantage of online education. I think it's an important tool in the toolkit, but it's not something that we should be reliant on. I think particularly when we talk about, I think online education can be really good for some students who can learn well that way. Again, I did online education through school. I sort of developed a deep-seated hatred of it. I'm not a fan personally, but that's just how it worked. I know other students that work quite well doing it, and I have done the odd university unit online as well. I mean, I had to during COVID, but then even through my time at Curtin, I have done mixed in with on-campus stuff. So I think as a way for attaining a course and that piece of paper and that qualification, online education can be quite an important tool there, particularly accessibility reasons as well. It can be quite handy for a variety of reasons. But if we want to talk about that university experience and that wraparound, being on campus is quite important. Being able to mingle with your peers, meet your tutors, have those conversations. And it's those conversations that actually enrich your experience at university, whether that is with the academics, with staff, with fellow students. So that's the important stuff to make sure that we're sort of cultivating. So I'm glad that broadly universities are trying really hard to move away from that. Obviously, sort of the bean counter thing again, if we look at the costings, it's much cheaper to just record one lecture that's going to last a few years, run a few Zoom classes, submit a few essays. That really cuts down on your costs for delivering, particularly things like humanities degrees. But at that cuts down the cost, but at what cost? So it's really investing in those sort of connections that I think we've really got to focus on at university, so that when people leave, they've got a community of people that they can rely on in the rest of the workforce, throughout their career, but throughout society as well. And that's sort of that critical role that universities play in fostering that society. And that was that objective that was laid out yesterday quite clearly, which is sort of fostering that strong, cohesive, democratic society as well. And that's sort of really important that that's at the core of what universities are delivering.
Thank you, Dylan. We have a question from the floor at the back table. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Shifa. I'm a student ambassador at the ACSES Equity and Inclusion team at UNSW. And first of all, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I think it's so important to hear what everyone's personal experience is like, whether that's at university or just navigating education from the start in general. Just to give some background as well, I come from an immigrant family and I'm the oldest child. We didn't have any relatives in Sydney. that I could really go to when I was trying to figure out or navigate what I want to do in the future. And so I really looked forward to hearing more from students in general who are coming from the position where they found their path to what they want to do. And I'm really grateful that I do that as my job right now as well. And I'm really glad to also hear the importance that was placed on having more knowledgeable careers advisors and really extending that sort of knowledge and people that, you know, young students can go to get that advice from, and really come from a vulnerable position when we're coming to ask for that advice. So that trust needs to really be there and needs to be a long-term relationship. So it's really important to hear that as well. I guess my question here is, I want to know more about your journey towards advocacy. You come from really amazing backgrounds, and hearing about how you were able to share your student voice, I really want to hear some more about that. What are some challenges you might have faced where you felt that you might not have felt heard? And I guess if not as well, what do you think moving forward can be done so that we can share our student voice?
Would you like to grab that one, Tayla?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your question. I think I just naturally fell into advocacy. So when I was a Rural Youth Ambassador in 2020, it was the first time the program had been run in South Australia. Absolutely loved the program, was lucky enough to attend the National Forum in Canberra the subsequent year, and I applied to be an intern in my first year of uni and have been since. So when I was in Canberra and the students met with Fiona Nash, I had a little chat to her, and when I got home to Streaky Bay, I got a call from her saying, "Hi Taylor, would you like to be a part of the Universities Accord?" And I was like, I don't know what that is, but sounds good. So then after the phone call, Googled what is an accord, and was like, okay, I think I've signed up for a lot here, but I really just threw myself into it. And like, not gonna lie, throughout the whole experience, yes, I have experienced a lot of self-doubt, or am I the best person to be representing students? But I think the most important thing is just to put yourself out there, because you never know what you can achieve. And who would have expected that I would have been able to have my voice heard at such a high level coming from Streaky Bay. So yeah, my advice to all the students in the room would just to be, have a crack and yeah, see what you can do.
And just on that as well, one of the things I forgot to mention at the beginning is, so I'm someone that's been to 13 schools. So I've been to 10 primary schools and 3 high schools throughout my childhood, and through so there's 10 primary schools across Western Australia and 3 high schools. And I graduated from Tom Price Senior High School, which is up in the Pilbara, and lived there for a couple of years. And it's very much a challenge. There's not a lot of access to opportunities that you have there, so you sort of have to advocate for them. And part of the reason why I became such an advocate for Indigenous students is in high school, I was a part of the Follow the Dream program, which is run by the Graham Polly Farmer Foundation in Western Australia. It's a foundation that's non-for-profit, but it provides homework classes for Indigenous students after school. I was approached by the coordinator to do the program, and I sort of said, well, I'm pretty good with my grades, like I'm really, really good, I don't think I need homework classes. And he said to me, no, I think you should come as a mentor because, you know, you do really well, and I think you might be useful for some students. And I said, I don't really want to teach my peers. And he said, no, there's primary school students that attend this program as well as high school. And so I attended the program and I helped mentor Indigenous students from year 7. I was in year 10 at the time and I didn't think much of it, but that was a pivotal point for me in terms of advocacy, because I realised that those students, although they participated in the program, they didn't talk to non-Indigenous people because they didn't know how. And so talking to me, they quickly realised that they were safe to do so. And it was through that advocacy that they were then able to continue through the program and improve their grades. And I only mentored in English, but it was at that point I followed through, and once I graduated, I was the only Aboriginal student that graduated from my year out of 16. And I'm also the only one that's in university. So from then on, I sort of became an advocate through high school, through university, and it just all slowly fell into place for me. I like to share my voice in terms of things that I feel need to be shared on, and so knowing that it's heard or that people benefit from it, because there's been silence for so long in terms of in institutions like this, so I'm always well aware that my voice is not representative of all First Nations people, so I'm always wary of that, and I always try and convince others to advocate for things and to always put their voices on and experiences through.
Thank you very much. We have a question at the front table.
Hi, I'm Michael Burgess. I was the Chief Student Experience Officer here at Western for 7.5 years, up until mid last year. I'd like to really make a comment about the challenges to student success, and it's something I don't think is talked about enough in the sector, and that is, I think we have a significant lack of understanding. Now, what I mean by that is, when I first joined Western, my background's commercial sector, I was shocked that for an institution that's an evidence-based learning institution, our evidence base around our students was non-existent. Now, we did a whole lot of work on deep insights to deeply understand what the issues are, whereas the sector tends to rely on a blunt benchmarking tool called Quilt, or having student panels and then everyone pats themselves on the back and says, great, we've talked to the students. Now, don't get me wrong, student panels are fabulous, and we absolutely need to do them, but we need to do so much more. Through that deep level of understanding, we were able to understand where those not only sort of collective issues were, but then by putting in things like voice of student, where you're getting real-time feedback, putting in those sort of mechanisms where we understand students. So, Dylan, if you're feeling a bit down, we understand that and we can respond to your particular need. And Kayla, comes back to your point about you can't be what you can't see. We don't see a lot of this stuff, and I don't think as institutions we talk about this enough. We don't have the capabilities in place to deal with it. And here's the thing, if you get those in place, that leads to cultural change, which is another thing we don't talk about enough. So the number of times we would call things out and say, we've got a problem over here that we didn't know about for decades. It's remarkable the response you would see from the organisation and the shift that you would see in people's mindsets and want to do something about it. So, as I said, it's more a comment than anything else, but I think that's something we need to think seriously about as institutions. And if you look at, and this quite often gets frowned, we used to get frowns when I used to cite commercial examples, but if you think about the best experience you've had, which is typically with a commercial organisation, or it might be Service New South Wales, for example, that's because those organisations have a deep commitment, a deep insight to their customers, and they will respond accordingly.
Thank you very much. I might grab an online question and then we'll do a question at the back of the room. Thanks. An online question. Were any of the students involved in outreach programs, and did they feel these programs worked?
Yeah. So I've been involved in outreach programs, similar to Follow the Dream in Western Australia. I feel like they work if they're led by people who understand equity students, if they're led by people with the professional development skills and communication skills to be able to communicate with the students in those programs, and if they're all mentor-based. I know that a lot of the time that I do outreach, when students come to Curtin, I do a presentation to some of the high school students, particularly those from Newman and Port Hedland and Karratha, because I know a lot of the family connections to them. I talk to them, explain my journey to them and different challenges that they might have had. And for the first time, a lot of them, it's their first time coming onto a university campus, but it's also the first time that a lot of those students ever even came to Perth. So I always find it quite interesting that something as simple as outreach programs, sometimes it's the first time that a student is actually even at university or even understands what the word university means. I had a student that once asked me, is this like a college like in the movies? And I said, yeah, something like that. So it's really beneficial, and particularly in Western Australia, knowing that a lot of the small regional towns that people come from or students come from, they don't get a lot of awareness in terms of what is possible for students to be able to do. And so as long as these outreach programs are evidence-based, led by people who understand and have been through those backgrounds, you can't really go wrong, as long as there's someone that's leading it understands the struggles that those students might face within those programs. I think you find that they do work and that they have been successful. And if they are successful, then you'll find that alumni people like me who came from outreach programs tend to give back to them and want them to succeed. I think I've got close to 17 different students who I've mentored in the past 10 years that have all been in through university now, and I still maintain contact with them. So, I think for me in Western Australia they work. Don't know much about any other state.
Yeah, we hear a little bit in our organisation about students with disability for whom those outreach programs were a lifeline. It was the first time someone had actually communicated to them that university was an option for them, because it was someone who had come in from externally and had come in and identified a student and just had a conversation with them, as opposed to students who have those kind of compounding low expectations that have built up from being at a school for a long time and teachers having certain experiences and understandings of those students. But on the other hand, we also hear from students who have grown up in segregated education settings, and outreach programs don't go there. I mean, if any of your universities are sending outreach programs to segregated school settings, you get all of my gold stars for the day. But again, the extremely low expectations of students who attend those settings, regardless of what their disability experience is, the assumption is made that they will not attend university, and therefore what's the point in investing the resourcing and the time to going out to those settings? And I think that in the disability space, that's our next big frontier, shifting those very, very low expectations and actually assuming that someone is interested rather than assuming that they are not interested. We always need to go in and speak with every student with an open mind, because otherwise you're just perpetuating this cycle of discrimination and the low expectations that these students have faced their entire life. The conversation around segregated educational settings in primary and secondary is really fraught at the moment. It was one of those issues that the Disability Royal Commission, they didn't come to a unanimous finding on. Broadly speaking, there's a goal to phase them out over the next 25 years or so. But regardless of what your view is on those settings, every single student with disability and every single student needs to have the opportunity to have the information presented to them, to ask questions, and to be considered as a legitimate applicant, because those low expectations are just perpetuating the same cycles of discrimination that these students experience for their whole lives.
And just one more thing on the outreach programs. While yes, they might work for some institutions, but I think a lot of people forget what outreach can do and the social impact towards it. Because what I've found is though, yes, we can do outreach to equity students and get them into university, but it's about maintaining that relationship and connection with them to keep them in university, because then otherwise, why did you even bother trying to outreach to them to begin with if you didn't follow through and build the relationships with those students? And also, how does that then impact whether you go back to the more students that are still in the same program, if you're not then following through with those future ones coming through? So while outreach might work for some, I guess it's all about the social impact that it provides and looking at whether or not it's developed and planned and if it's a meaningful program.
And Dylan, did you want to say something? Because you spoke about the criminally low levels of expectation for kids from the bush and the outer suburbs.
Yeah, I don't think I can't remember any outreach programs coming to my school. I know that UWA does the Aspire program, and that's sort of the only, at least from our perspective. But again, that's where people come. Like they would fly a group down to Perth for a few days, but that's only a small group of students that the school identifies as being potentially worthy. So then that comes into other levels of low expectations. So yeah, I think universities should really be looking at getting out more into those areas. WA is a big place. It's a very expensive job to get out to every country town and every school and engage with people that way. But you know, I was in high school for however many years you go to high school for, and I can't remember any outreach program coming directly to university, coming directly to school from any university. So,
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. We have a question down the back.
Hi, so my name is Audrey. I'm also an ambassador at UNSW in the Access, Equity and Inclusion team. Just want to say thank you so much for sharing your stories as well. It's been really insightful. This question kind of relates to the last question that you've gotten as well. So Tayla, you mentioned something called Journey Mates. So that was a mentor group that you were part of. It reminds me of a project that we actually have at UNSW called Start at UNSW, where the students that kind of came in through our Gateway program, which is our equity kind of pathway, alternative pathway into UNSW, they're able to get some mentoring from students that are doing the kind of degrees that they're doing in their faculty. And I just wanted to get a bit more like insight on what your thoughts were on how the outreach programs, how you can connect from high school into university, how we can kind of bridge that transition gap, try to see if we're able to get some good results in order for, because like Kathleen said, outreaching is always really good, but then if they come to uni but they don't know how to stay in uni, then it's kind of like, what's the point? So how do you think we should be able to bridge that kind of gap, have them see the different students that come from outreach programs or come from these schools that are in the outer areas and see kind of that progression from high school into university?
Thanks, Audrey. I'll have to come and find you later because that program sounds amazing.
Yes, please.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that similar to the program you've got, Journey Mates, I think it's the most important part about it is that it's youth to youth and it's genuine connections. So when unis come to your school when you're in, say, 10 or 11, I don't know about you guys, but they're generally trying to sell the uni to you. It's a sales pitch. Just like Dylan said, it's all about who's got the most nicest architecture and the fanciest things. We want to know what's the experience like, what's it going to be like when I rock up in O Week on Monday, how am I going to navigate this new pathway in my life? So that's what Journey Mates is all about. And you can also ask like your mentor questions about, I don't know, how do I apply for a job, or how do I, just things like not even having your family with you when you relocate for study. Like I remember having to take myself to my first doctor's appointment when I first moved to Adelaide. That was terrifying in itself. So having that mentor, I think, really provides that person to fall back on. Even last night, one of the students I'm mentoring from WA, he's an Indigenous young person in his first year of medicine at one of the unis in Western Australia. And I've been talking with him heaps over the last couple of months as he's just started his studies, and I got a message saying, Tayla, I got my test results back today. I'm super disappointed. I don't know if this is the place for me. Like, should I be doing medicine? And I tried to reassure him that you are in the right place, like it's going to get better. Here are ways that you can try and find support. And I wish that I had that kind of support when I first started uni. And like when I look at, say, my classmates from Streaky Bay, one of my good friends, she'd always wanted to be a social worker. So she packed up her stuff, moved 8 hours to Adelaide, and didn't make it past week 1 of university. So I guess I think about the program that you've mentioned, Audrey, and if something like that would have been able to help her stay to follow that pathway, I don't know, I feel like it would help her and so many other young people like ourselves.
Wonderful.
There's a question down the front here.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Good morning to you all. I'm Bron, Bronwyn Williams, sorry, from Western Sydney University. I work on communities and primary program. I had just a question, because it's been somewhat answered, but it's related to what you were mentioning, Tayla, about support. And I wanted to ask, what does good and effective support for current university students actually look like for all of you? I'd love to just sort of hear some ideas from the low cost to the not so low cost sort of range, if that's okay.
Dylan, would you like to kick it off and we'll come back along?
Yeah, look, it depends. I think we can't discount for a lot of students that a lot of stress at university, like there's always going to be a level of academic stress that you're not going to remove that entirely. You can manage that, and that's where appropriate mentorship, guidance, support from academics can really help and has helped me in the past. But then I think a lot of that sort of life stress, financial stress a lot of the time does feed into that academic stress. So if you've got to work a lot in order to afford to live, that is going to be difficult to maintain your studies at a level, particularly if you're trying to juggle, there are students that do 2 or 3 jobs and full-time study. I don't know how they do it, and they struggle a lot, and that's sort of a difficult situation to be in. So, a lot of that does come back to the economy. That's not something that the universities can click their fingers and fix, but there are a lot of things that universities can do to help support that, particularly when it comes to things like on-campus accommodation and other levels of support that can be provided in times of crisis. We know that the government safety net isn't enough, so if there was a way for universities to look at having a way to expand that safety net to some extent for the students that they are ultimately receiving a large amount of tuition fees from, I think that could be quite beneficial to look at with sort of an open mind. But again, that's something that universities can actually, be advocating for on behalf of students, is when we go into those meetings actually discussing things like the age of independence when it comes to welfare payments, when it comes to the rate of things like youth allowance, Austudy, Abstudy. These are things that universities can actively be on the side of students with, to little to no cost and actually a lot of benefit to universities. And these are things that are going to make the difference. Probably not next year, because this will be something that, it's a campaign that's gone for many years and hasn't achieved anything yet. But with the support of the university sector, and if we get large amounts of the rest of society on board, this is something that it will happen eventually. But it's a case of how soon this will happen. That will have an enormous benefit and remove a lot of stress from students in that immediate term. Universities can be discussing, let's reduce the cost of the humanities degrees, let's make everything equal again, let's even this out. There's lots of things that happen at a government level that for the last 30 years, the majority of universities have been broadly happy to just let happen because it doesn't affect their bottom line broadly. That's the pressure moving back onto the students. Whereas if the universities are actively on the side of students, and then that feeds into, in the long term, being on the side of the universities, having a cohort of students that aren't worried about that financial stress coming into university because they know that there's going to be a level of support provided to them, not through some long, highly competitive scholarship process, which a lot of students don't get because that's just the nature of the beast, but through a decent level of base support where students will know that I've got a period of time to settle myself in, particularly coming from regional areas. I've got a period of time to settle myself in, get on my feet, figure out how I'm going to work this out in the long term, and then they can really, hopefully, flourish from there with that appropriate level of support provided by the university, pastoral support, things like doctors on campus, bulk billing, all of these sort of little things that can really help. Mental health is a huge thing, counselling, psychology, all of these things are huge. So those are the things that universities should be looking at providing on campus and online for online students as well, as much as universities should actually be hand in hand fighting for students to make sure that every student in Australia has that base level of support that they can then come into and flourish if they need it.
Can I add to that? I have so many thoughts on effective student supports, and most of them centre around meeting the student where they're at. When I enrolled in my undergraduate degree, throughout the 5 years that it took me to complete that, I changed my degree like 3 times, which probably could have benefited from some support before that, but life happens. But every time I did that, I needed to go and seek support from a student advisor or a course advisor. And in the various colleges that I was enrolled in, the only way that you could do that was in a walk-in session, a drop-in session between 10 and 12 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I worked full-time through most of my undergraduate degree. I'm never going to be able to sit there and wait in a line for 2 hours until an advisor is ready to see me in 2 hours in the middle of a day. Finding ways to deliver flexible services that meet students where they're at. We're really busy. A lot of us are working these days. With cost of living, that's only going to become more the case, and people are only going to be enrolling in part-time degrees more frequently than they are now. It's things like not requiring documentation for things that just really don't require documentation. I, for a lot of reasons, wasn't able to get an access plan for my undergraduate degree, but I just really needed to make sure that all my lecturers were using their microphones properly during their courses so that I could hear what was going on and I didn't have to rely on the exhaustion of over-auditory processing, of trying to work out what was going on all the time. But I needed an access plan to make that request. I asked the lecturer in this particular course, please can you use a microphone when you're delivering your lectures? It was in a very well kitted out lecture room. There were no tech barriers to doing that. And he said that he didn't want to, and that perhaps I should drop out of this course and this wasn't the course for me. And that just makes me think that's probably not the career for him. But also, like, that would have cost $0, zero time. And why on earth should I have needed to have gone through an entire assessment process, through a psychiatrist, getting all the reporting, going through the access plan thing, to do that free zero cost thing? And I think there are loads of examples of that, in the disability space, but more broadly, just around making learning flexible, making supports flexible, where it's really quick and easy to implement an adjustment. Just do it. It's really not difficult to make sure that your assessment guidelines contain all the relevant information so that I don't have to go to you and follow up on all of that extra information. That's just one thing you have to do one time. So I think that's one part of it in terms of effective supports. The other part is that we put the burden on students to seek support, and we use the excuse that, because of privacy reasons, we can't proactively reach out to students because then they might know that we know that they're from a rural, regional, remote background, or that they're from a disability background, or whatever. And I hear that from a privacy perspective, but I think that's lazy. I think that if you told students when they enrolled, hey, if you tell us this information, thank you for doing that, we really appreciate it, and we might reach out to you to provide you some support, and it's an opt-in or an opt-out system, the vast majority of students are going to opt into that because it's just a really great way to make sure that you've got just a little bit of backup there if you need it. I just think that privacy argument is lazy and it's overdone, and I've heard it at every single university that I've worked at, across both the staff and the student space. On the staff space, it's always like, we can't collect data about staff ethnicity because then what if they don't want us to have that, and therefore we're not going to be able to report on that to our various accreditation bodies. Like, it's the same problem, but I just think it's a bit of a circular argument and that maybe we should just get on with it. Finally, designing courses and curriculums in a way that is accessible and inclusive for everyone by default. And I know that sounds like a really big picture thing. That's probably more towards the high cost direction of your question. Things like implementing universal design for learning, they can be time consuming to do in the first place, to integrate that into all of your curriculum design. Not going to mislead you on that, but it will save so much time and resourcing and money and student angst over time. Can you imagine that if for every single student who gives you their access plan and they require alternative format materials, that you just already had those, or that all of your materials were already all captioned, or that you already had everything scanned in an OCR compatible PDF, and you didn't have to constantly do that every single time? Like, how much time and money would that save? And then you take the burden off the student. Because again, the burden is always on the student to reach out for help. We're busy enough. I don't know about you guys, but like, I don't have time to wait for 2 working weeks for someone to email me back when I'm looking for something and I just need an answer to a question. Building that in from the start means that, you know, I suppose we take, you know, perhaps less of a focus on the sort of reactive supports and more of a focus on just proactively delivering quality learning and services to students who are paying a lot of money to study at your institutions.
And just on that, assessments. Why are we having assessments due on a Wednesday at 5 p.m? Let's have some consistency, make them all Sunday 11:59 p.m, because that way students who have work commitments, who have caring commitments, who have children, have the weekend to work on assignments, it's just added stress that you have one unit with all your assignments due at 11:59 on a Sunday, and then another 2 or 3 units with all different times. It's just one simple thing, one consistency across all of it. Also, why are we having non-Indigenous people teach subjects related to Indigenous peoples? I shouldn't have to get up in the classroom and correct someone's knowledge about Indigenous perspectives about a topic. It's not easy. It's not hard. It's pretty easy. It's co-led. It's co-teaching. You know that you're teaching Indigenous topics at university. You should be approaching Indigenous people within that field of study. It's low cost to have a lecture or a tutorial recorded about somebody who can give that insight and that perspective. Indigenous-led research, that's another thing. But there's so many different low-cost things that you could do in university to support equity students. And one of the things that I helped work on a project at Curtin is scholarships. A very first challenge for me was applying for scholarships. I think I wrote 15 different scholarship applications, and so I worked on a project for us to implement our one system protocol where you did one application and the scholarship team matched you to different scholarships, and they contacted you to say, hey, you're eligible for 5 or 6 scholarships, but we might need more information about this. It's not hard. It's very, very simple. It's making systems a lot easier. We talk about, I think we heard the other day about the roadmap for success. We have to build the road to begin with. And so I think that's where support starts, and it's where it should be.
Thank you. Tayla, did you have anything to add?
I think they've covered
We've
it
covered
pretty
it?
well, yeah.
No problems. And we have a question just at the back table.
Yeah. Hello, so my name is Ethan. I'm also an equity ambassador at the University of New South Wales. So I've done my fair share of outreach programs for my university, and that pretty much involves building connections with students and encouraging them and promoting them to come to my university. And a common problem that I would face when connecting with these students is that I would face a lot of students that have the mindset that university isn't the place for them. And my training in response to that is to encourage that, oh, that's fine, right? And I understand that university might not be the place for you, but our program can also support you in like alternative pathways after high school, other than university. But understanding or hearing like from Tayla and Dylan that this isn't, how should I put this? It's as a result of the low expectations and that they can't be what they can't see, right? So I just want to hear from your perspectives. If you were to face a student with that sort of mindset, how would you approach, or what's the strategy you would employ to, I guess, diverge them from that sort of mindset?
Whoever would like, Tayla?
I think if a student said that to me, I would question them, what are your morals? What gets you excited? What is your heart beat for? And then I guess hopefully that will lead them down the pathway. Well, is going to uni and pursuing higher education going to get you there? Or is it doing vet or TAFE? Yeah, I feel like, yes, university is not for everyone. However, as long as you're passionate about what you're doing and you're engaged and you feel like you're connected within the community, then that's what matters the most. I'm not sure if that's answered your question.
I'm just leading on from that. Yes, it is difficult to put that across to people to say that university might not be for everybody, but I think what people fail to understand is education is for everybody. It's whether or not you go through TAFE, VET, whatever you do, education is for everybody. And it doesn't matter which institute you do your education through and how long it takes you to get there. But I think that's where it sort of should start in terms of when we're talking to other people about whether or not they belong in a university or belong at VET. It's, no, you belong learning, because we're learning every day.
Thank you. And we have a question from the back of the room.
Yep. My name is Danny. I'm a student ambassador and a success advisor at Western Sydney University. And firstly, I want to say thank you to all the students, first of all, for overcoming such hardships and to be able to overcome them and speak about them and advocate for other students who might be going through the same problem. It's very heartwarming to see. I guess my question, I mean, we had briefly mentioned a little bit about self-doubt and the imposter syndrome. And my question, I came from an immigrant family, so a little bit of background, and my English was weak. So I was always in the class, even in university, second year, and I was always, do I belong here? Am I smart enough to be here? And I guess my question is, did you have similar experience, and what did the university provide, or what would you recommend to provide to overcome such self-doubt or imposter syndrome?
Great question. Would anybody like to kick that off?
Yeah. I had imposter syndrome for a whole year when I was in university, mostly because I was the first in my family to be there. I had a lot of doubt in sense of, is this the journey that I want to be doing? Is this the pathway that I want to do? I did vet training first, so I did a certificate for in digital media and technology, and I did my business certificate through TAFE. And so that was the only thing that I had known is that pathway. And so when I made the move over into university, I thought, this is too hard. I actually want to go back to vet because it's easier. And so I had a lot of doubt in that first year, thinking it'd be cheaper, it'd be easier, I'd be back home in Drelton, it'd be a lot more, I'd be having my family. And so it was quite a challenge in that first year, thinking, do I belong here? And the way that I overcome it was through buddy systems, is through mentorships with other students, other Indigenous students who also were going through the same things. And together, I think we all found a sense of belonging against one another in that setting. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people experience it, especially people who move from different towns and different interstates. I met a student who was an Indigenous student from Brisbane who had moved over to Perth, who got into Curtin University. They had imposter syndrome for about 2 years, thinking, why am I in another state doing this? I should be back home trying to get into another university. So I think everyone experiences it, and it's just a matter of overcoming it.
I have a slightly different experience to you, and for me, university was a really natural place for me to go because of the aspiration building that I received when I was growing up. And I think that speaks to like how important that is to be surrounded by that kind of attitude growing up. You know, making role models in your life visible who maybe have had that experience, or those outreach programs that are led by people with lived experience of being first in family and experiences of overcoming those challenges. But for me, when I moved into vet learning is when I experienced major imposter syndrome, because all of a sudden I couldn't just rely on writing great essays with lots of research and like in-text citations, and I couldn't hide behind that written word anymore. And that, you know, for me as someone who has had additional challenges in building those communication skills, that was really challenging for me. And all of a sudden I had to like be the assessment. I did my certificate 2 to 4 in Australian Sign Language in Auslan, and all of a sudden it was like, it was my body that was being assessed. And that was such an interesting change for how I felt like in university education, it was my brain and my writing, and that really changed in that transition. And I think it's important for, I guess, universities and TAFE settings to remember that, different students will experience those transition points really differently depending on the way that they've been raised and the experiences that they've had. And that's potentially an interesting thing to consider in the sort of university and TAFE, integration or harmonisation conversation, that these two educational pathways have very, very different cultures and very different learning experiences, and that we can't assume that because someone has done really well in one, that they're going to do equally well in the other, and vice versa, that because they struggled in one, that they're not going to do fantastically in a different one. So I think that, hearing from people who've had really different experience across different sectors is important, and to remember that not everyone's going to have the same experience. But thank you for sharing your personal experience as well, and thank you to all the students who've given their personal reflections. It's great to have a wider conversation.
Wonderful. And I think we have one question over here, this side of the room first, and then over this side. Thank you.
I'll just move so you can see me. Thank you. Awesome panel again. Student panel is always the highlights of these conferences. But I wanted to ask about advocacy more broadly, and particularly the student voice. And we see a lot more, I think, in places like the US, of the student voice really leading to policy change. And we haven't really talked about encampments today. I don't really want to particularly talk about that, but I wanted to talk about how you see student voice and advocacy in terms of policy. And you mentioned the implementation committee for the Accord, and there's no student representation on that. And that's probably not surprising because of the way we're structured. We had a panel yesterday where we had representatives from all the lobby groups. We've got an IRU and an ATN and a group of 8 and a Universities of Australia group, and they're all funded quite heavily by the universities. So I wondered how you thought going forward, organisations like the National University, NUS, but perhaps other bodies as well, could strengthen that student voice in a policy sense. So we're not just hearing the student experiences and isn't it interesting, and it is, but that we're getting a more high-level, serious advocacy voice from the students. And how do we embed that structurally into the sector, and how do you kind of lift what you're saying, which is so important to a bigger group than this, and to particularly the political folks?
This is part of the focus of my research, which is the scariest sentence to ever hear anyone say in a university setting, so I'm so sorry. But I have spent the last couple of months collating information about every single university's student voice mechanisms. So I have a giant spreadsheet on my computer. It is called the Bible, and it has every single one of the 42 Australian universities, what mechanism they have for a student representative council or a student organisation, and then, because the focus of my research is disability advocacy, whether or not they have a specific disability advocacy sort of function or collective or whatever that might be. And what I'm finding is that the difference between universities that have very strong and effective student voice seems to be whether or not the student organisation or the union or the guild or whatever they're called in your institutions, whether or not that is independently run, and whether or not that is controlled or somewhat administrated by the university, or if it is an organisation that is perhaps incorporated as an association or run separately, as a community organisation or a business. Because whilst there are challenges in working from, as universities with those groups, and I've seen it as both a student and a staff member at ANU. I think what that does is it gives students the autonomy to set up the governance structures, the financial structures, the funding and the budget structures that they see as necessary to deliver on the advocacy imperative, and to feel like they can speak up and speak the truth without having negative consequences to their study, because it's not attached to the university necessarily. And for universities that don't have those things, I see a lot less organic, student collectivism happening. So for universities where their SRC is kind of like a subcommittee of the council, or it's, just a sort of little, by EOI kind of body that sits as a part of like the student experience team or something, it's just not as effective. They feel like they're still controlled. Their voices are controlled by the university and they can't speak up about specifically what it is that they need. Whereas when these organisations are running themselves autonomously, they're able to divert resources to doing really great research and doing really fantastic consultation with students so that they can collectivise that voice and then do effective advocacy. Where those don't exist, I also see in the disability case, and I haven't looked at it, in other experience groups, but student disability collectives in particular, so in your organisation, they might be called associations, collectives, whatever it is, they tend to be much less prevalent in universities where the student association is not independently run. And to me, that says that where that sort of independent, perhaps like unionism perspective isn't as strong and that culture of speaking up is not as strong, students don't feel that like they can bring themselves together organically to collectivise and think about what are the priorities of the group, how can we effectively prioritise what those are and communicate them in a way that the university understands in a sophisticated way such that it can be implemented into real university policy. But Dylan, you might have some thoughts on that based on your Curtin experience.
Yeah, here. Fully agree. No, I think WA has it right in a lot of ways in that regard by having the student unions established in the Act that establishes the universities. It prevents universities from getting annoyed at particular things that students do, and that'll happen from time to time, and that's okay. But, I actually think a lot of the problems that we see arising, that we discuss at these forums, do come back a lot to VSU and those reforms that were pushed through back in the day. Obviously, we don't have that to the same extent in WA with the way that our guilds are established. An interesting reason as to it was one of the Conservative politicians back in the day decided we should be called guilds and not unions because they don't want us to be called unions. But we're a student union. But yeah, in the Act, we're there to advocate on behalf of students, and that's established in WA legislation. And that's something that I think, I imagine that universities that don't have that will probably be a little bit afraid of establishing something like that, and fair enough. But yeah, I think that it's quite an important body to represent students, to be there, to be something that can't be abolished. It's something that has a stable level of funding. It's something that is independent for students and by students, and that will be messy, just like any system, club, association that's organised democratically. But that's the nature of the beast, that's the nature of democracy. And there will be times where things go forward, there'll be times where things go backwards. But broadly speaking, I think in WA it's led to a more vibrant university sector. We'll have tiffs with admin, with, we don't always agree with what the NTEU is pushing for on campus. There's always going to be times where we're in alignment and disalignment, and that's fine. That's what these institutions and bodies are supposed to be about. But it's that level of respect, it's forced respect, I think, because it's in law, but it's a level of respect that exists for student unions in WA that should at least be emulated. I'd love to see what we could do with 100% SAF. I think we could do a lot of really incredible things with that, particularly in the space of housing, particularly in the space of increased student services. We know that every dollar spent by a student union is far more efficient than dollars spent by the university. We're far more accountable for the money that we spend because everyone, is up for election. And, we've self-organised in that way and we've been able to advocate for big things in the university. I don't know whether trimesters are still on the agenda for Curtin, but there was a huge campaign back in the day, so look at that, a big win for the Curtin Guild. But then there are lots of little things, issues like dead naming on campus for trans and gender diverse students. That's a campaign that's been going on and it's been a long process through the university and with academics. Issues like those standard submission times, small academic integrity issues that can happen from time to time, engaging with the issues like generative AI. All of these things, I think it actually leads to a better outcome for students, a better outcome for the university, a better outcome for tertiary education in general. That's the importance of having that sort of strong student voice. And if, you know, we sit there and we're afraid of that, I think that's quite worrying, to be honest, if we're heading that way. So we need to be heading back towards, you know, compulsory unionism in some way. I think that recommendation of 40% SAF to student-led organisations is a good step in the right direction. A lot of work to be done on definitions for that. But once these student unions are re-established on campus, that's going to go through and it's going to strengthen institutions like the NUS. It's going to strengthen that national voice. And there will be areas where we'll be in disagreement with the university lobby, and there will be areas where I hope that we're in solid agreement with the university lobby, and I think that's a really good way for the student union movement to hopefully be rebuilt in this country. But broadly, I think we all sort of generally agree, at least in this room, from what I'm hearing, the sentiment is we want to be heading towards that more equitable university sector. It'll be messy how we get there, that's just the way things work, but you know, I'm quite buoyed by this opportunity and by the opportunity that the Accord set. And I really hope that this is something that can be bipartisan and last in a long way, and something that universities actually get behind students and understand that, you know, students will sometimes disagree with universities, and that's good. That's the way it should be. I like mentioned the encampments. I've been camping at Curtin. I think that the list of asks are quite reasonable. I know that the Guild's been engaging with the university on this issue. I know that there's disagreements. That's the way it should be. And you know what the Senator said this morning, I utterly reject. That universities need to be stepping in and shutting this down. That's quite disgusting. The Curtin University has said that they respect the rights of students to protest. They're engaging with that in that manner. We'll see where that goes, but I'd be quite worried if coming out of this we sort of hear that we've got senators from the opposition party, the potential government. They could be the government as early as less than a year from now, saying that we need to be shutting down speech on campus. That's quite worrying to me. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things. I think it denigrates students, and I think it puts this into disrepute and our whole sector into disrepute, because we're seeing that we have in the media, coming from as much as the Prime Minister saying that, you know, these students couldn't point to the Jordan River on a map. What's that saying about the education of students in this country?
We need better teachers.
Yeah, well, we need better teachers. Would you look at that? But it's saying that we don't know what we're talking about. We're a bunch of silly little, you know, whatever. I think we're quite reasonable. You know, there's going to be differences in approach to activism. I agree and disagree with various different things. But the point is, it's all part of this big melting pot that is democracy. And if the universities aren't fostering that, I shudder to think that what government thinks they're going to get away with in the future when it comes to shutting down freedom of speech in our country. So universities need to be standing up for this. And I think some of the direction of some of the universities in this space when it comes to the camps is quite worrying to me, if they think they can just shut things down because of concerns that have been raised by various groups. And I think that there are opportunities to actually sit down and engage in a meaningful manner with students, and that needs to be respected from the top down, and likewise the other way around as well.
That's not to say that student organisations and unions are perfect. They're far from perfect, and we know that people who engage with those groups are disproportionately people who have the time to and the privilege to be able to volunteer their time in that way. And so we know that there are probably a lot of voices missing from those movements. But you know, the alternative is that the student voice becomes a program. And I don't like thinking about student voice as a program, because it is temporary, it is at the whim of the university, and it means that students are constrained to talking about the things that the university wants them to talk about. And so there's not a perfect solution there. Perhaps we need both, perhaps we need a combination, but student voice can't be a program. I think it's just, you know, oh great, here's $20,000 to go and run, you know, 6 months of student voice. I, you know, have experienced it at, you know, some universities and seen how that has both brought in a whole load of voices that we might not have otherwise have heard, which is fantastic, because in a lot of cases it gives you the opportunity to pay students for their time, which is incredibly important. we forget that, you know, in a lot of cases, students sitting in the room with staff members, those staff members are being paid for their time because they're there as a part of their job. Those students are there for free, and that creates such a challenging power dynamic. But these are all issues that we need to grapple with really honestly, and staff and students need to work together to think about how can we balance making sure that all the voices we need are in the room, making sure that people are compensated for their time, but also that students can act autonomously and bring up the priorities organically that they need to, rather than focusing on predetermined focus areas by the university.
And just on that, in terms of Indigenous voice within universities, I think over the years, Indigenous voice has been heard, and we've talked, but at what point do we start listening? And I think that's where universities need to focus their efforts in terms of, right, we've given what we could give, it's time to listen and create meaningful relationships, meaningful things that benefit both people, and we start doing some reciprocity back. Because I know that in terms of me voicing my opinions in Indigenous voice, I'm representative of me and my family. My experiences, I don't represent all Indigenous peoples. And I think when we talk about Indigenous voice, it's very hard to try and get a lot of different people's perspectives, but just know that there's so many different methods, so many different avenues in which student voice has been expanded on. We've got the student experience survey. That's student voice. That's the opinions of students in their experience. Why aren't we learning from that? What are we taking back from these surveys that we do? From all these different methods, all these different things that students put their efforts into voicing their opinions at university, at what point do we look at these types of different data that we have and avenues and start to develop things that actually then take on their considerations more seriously and start to change things? Because we've been given our voices, we've been telling people from the beginning what we need to do, putting Indigenous people at the forefront of sustainability. Sustainability was added to the dictionary in 1972. Indigenous people have known sustainability for 60,000 years. That's our voice, and it's not being heard, and it's not being listened to. And so in terms of Indigenous voice and governance, I'm not too sure about that, but I think Indigenous voice as a whole, it definitely needs some work, and I think we just need to start listening.
Thank you. We have time for one more question from the floor.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mara Eversons from the University of Canberra. I wanted to bring us back to the support question, but just on the student voice, thank you all very much for your opinions there. And I think that reminder that we are getting student survey results is a really good one, because we all sort of think we need to hear them, actually, see and hear to the student, but we need to look at the surveys, and we're trying to do that and see what sounds we can hear from that and what differences we can make. Student support, look, the age-old question, how do we make sure students know the supports are there? Look, I appreciate the comment that we need to be reaching out to students, and certainly I agree, if they provide us that information, we can use that information and we can reach out to students. But that's usually at the beginning of year one. No, it's that we're here, we can help you. But what happens when they need that help, at the end of year one, in year 2, 3, 4 or 5, and they've forgotten, of course, that we told them all about it at orientation, or we did reach out in an email. How do we get the information out to students so that they see it, read it, hear it, and know we are there? That's what we I think a lot of universities are trying to deal with, and how do we make sure they know we're around?
Awesome. Tayla, did you want to try that?
I feel like you need to come with an approach that's relevant to what we will engage with. So whether you, make a TikTok account or something, or use social media, ways that we will definitely see and engage with it. Because personally, I'm not going to deep dive into my university's website, scrolling through all of this, going under a million tabs, trying to find exactly what I need. If you've got presentations and really engaging resources, then that's how I'm going to know it's there. But I'm not necessarily going to seek for it per se if it's too hard to access. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you guys want to add something, please feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I controversial to bring this up, but I think this is really entwined with the issue of the casualisation of the university workforce in a lot of ways, because ultimately for a student that's struggling and is perhaps not engaging with services already, they're not engaged with clubs, they're not part of student groups necessarily, the people that they are most likely to be engaging with are their tutors and their lecturers. And I'm a sessional at Deakin University at the moment. I've been doing some marking for a first year unit, and the convener of that course has been really proactive about giving us little comment snippets describing support services that are available. Anyone who's marked assignments knows it's quite easy to tell when there's something going on, when you can see it in someone's writing, or you can see it in the way they have or haven't addressed the rubric properly, and you can tell that they could benefit from a particular support service. But at the end of the day, sessionals and course conveners, regardless of what contract they're on, they've got really, really limited time to be able to provide that degree of support. But integrating support into curriculum and into learning is so, so important. Students are there already, and that's not adding an extra burden on them to go and to find that information. It's about empowering those staff who are at the coalface, interacting with students every single day, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's online learning, whatever it is, and helping them to find ways to deliver information about supports, because that's what's going to reach students. As a student and a staff member at Deakin at the moment, I get somewhere like 12 newsletters a week in my inbox, and it's just noise, and I never know what I'm supposed to look at. And if you add information in there, it's not reaching me. I automatically file them out of my inbox so that I don't get stressed. But if, sessionals and, you can integrate it into that learning practice where students already are and where they're reading feedback or where they have to engage with a particular assignment, I think that's the best way to get it to the broadest range of students.
Wonderful. Any other comments?
Yeah, just in terms of support, there's so many different simple methods that I think is institutional that could be changed in terms of messaging for students. I think one semester I had 57 emails about what I could access, all giving me the same information from my faculty. I'm in 2 faculties, so I get this double from student services. I think actually approaching a communication strategy as to how universities should approach students and contact students, that's something that could help towards supporting students. I know that if you look at how different emails and messaging and, sometimes I get a text message from a faculty or things like that. And so there's so many different methods in which universities contact students, but I think having one sort of messaging around when do we contact students, what do we know that happens in the second year that students experience. If you already know what they're going to experience and what impacts they might have, let them know ahead of time, like meet them where they are. If you know in second year that that's going to be your hardest, then that's where your resources should be. Is if you know that you want students to be retained in their third year, then actually put effort into retaining them in your third year. Pulse checks, messaging around how's your third year going, phone calls from scholarships. Actually, I've noticed that you haven't applied for any scholarships. There's no phone call to a student to say, hey, you qualify for a scholarship, but you've never applied for one. That's simplest things that could be done. That is institutional change. And these are things that I think go back to the individual, because a lot of the time you get staff members in these type of roles that put that on themselves to actually reach out and to do the main part of the support. In my second year, one of my units that I had, my lecturer, she's still my favourite lecturer, and she spent the first 20 minutes of our unit explaining academic integrity like you do, but she went through some examples about academic integrity from previous students and some case studies, and she said, these are some different circumstances that happened to some students. This is what I did to deal with it. So if you come to me and tell me how I can help you, I will help you, because this is what I've done last semester. These are the different students. And she said, I've never had any student fail my unit so far. And to me, that's just the individual putting that out there.
but it's something that should be institutional, and it's something that is quite simple. So yeah, I think small things like that is low cost.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm conscious of the time, and I'd like the last words to come from the students. So perhaps we can come along. Is there any last point or takeaway that you'd like for the audience here and the audience online? Perhaps Dylan, if you'd like to kick us off.
Or even imagining if you had the minister still here, what would you say to him?
Yeah. Keep doing a great job. Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of goodwill coming out of this. Firstly, just big shout out to the equity practitioners. I know they've and the student services staff at the universities who do a lot of heavy lifting in this area, dealing with a lot of broken systems, and I know they've generally got one of the toughest jobs at university. Sitting in their building, I know at Curtin we've got the Curtin Connect building, and you sort of have a steady stream of students coming in with a variety of problems, and they do a lot of really hard work, and they need as much support as they possibly can get. I think there's a lot of goodwill, but it's a case of really making sure that we're actually heading in the right direction. I welcome the Accords. I think they're a really good step in the right direction, but I think they are only one step in the right direction. If we want to keep at that end goal of universities in this country being strong public assets that contribute to a better, stronger society, and then through a better, stronger society, we're actually then creating the conditions for economic growth. It's not the other way around. I think that's the priority that we need to be focused on moving forward. I think emphasising student voice in that moving forward is really important. We need to move away from the casualised system of employment at universities. We need to move towards really well-funded positions that are providing strong services for students, that are doing the important research that's going to drive our country into the future, that is delivering sort of the base of what the future is, which is a knowledge-based world, a world where we need to be highly educated, a world where we need to be making sure that we are engaging with each other in a way that is respectful, that is safe, that's culturally appropriate, that treats everyone with respect for who they are. That sort of comes back. I mean, that's just the definition of equity, isn't it? That's what we need to be heading towards. But I think we're talking about the right things, but it's whether or not we're actually going to deliver on them is what's important at the moment. So making sure we actually have these accountability mechanisms. I think student voice needs to be at the core of those accountability mechanisms, where we are actually working towards, and so does staff. That's professional staff and academic staff as well. Everyone in Australia in a few years' time need to be thinking that everyone in this country is a stakeholder in our higher education system. And that's what we need to be heading towards, that we're respected, that we don't stand for people undermining us, that we get over this tall poppy syndrome that infects this country, that we allow people to stand up, to grow, to get that level of attainment, that higher education, that we support them in order to do that. So that we can then say, that I can then say, you know, to my kids in the future potentially, that go and do that because this country's got your back, the university will have your back. We're going to invest in you because we know that once we've invested in you, you're going to create a stronger country, a stronger world, a better place for future generations.
Thank you, Dylan. Evie, last thoughts?
I think if I could go back to before the Accord was submitted and before it was publicised, I'd want two things to happen. The first one is obvious, please fix the data, just fix that. I won't talk any more about that. The second one is have a think about the lessons, the good and the bad from the UK. How can we create an accountability system for universities to need to create and report on and evaluate systemic change? Rather than identifying a gap in your student cohort and throwing a scholarship there, think better how can you change the system to remove the barrier rather than creating a band-aid for the student? It's not good enough anymore to be adjusting everything, trying to, you know, work around things. Just fix the system. The fact that we have to have, the disability standards for education in the first place to provide for adjustments to the learning process, that implicit in that is that our learning processes are not accessible, and it's 2024, and they should just be accessible by default. I think that doing things like that, bringing in things like universal design for learning, rolling out genuine systemic level thinking that is whole of university, not artificially separating the experiences of staff and students, is how we are genuinely going to create more equitable institutions. I think, we know that universities were created as white colonial institutions by powerful groups of society, and therefore the systems reflect those priorities. They don't reflect the priorities of people who are historically marginalised and underserved by those systems. So we need to just fix the system and make it better, not fix the students.
Thank you, Evie. Thank you. Kathleen?
Yeah, just on there as well, yes. Let's not reinvent the wheel. I think if we go back to basics and really try and support the students where they're at, I think recommendation 18 is the safety needs in the accord. Looking at that, I see cultural safety at the beginning, because that should be the one important thing for universities to focus on, is your student safety in all aspects. It's the core of any business. You don't want to go to a workplace and feel unsafe. And so I think in terms of beyond, we want to make universities and any educational institute a safe place for students to be able to be educated. It's a pillar against the United Nations sustainability goals that everyone has a safe access to equitable education. And so building on cultural safety within universities, we want to be able to not just fix the system, but really understand why it's broken and why it doesn't work and how we can fix it, like you said, with the Band-Aids. Looking at the system, and we're talking about the roadmap for success. Success means something to everyone differently. For an Indigenous person coming into university, success is even getting in. Success is not ending up in prison. That's success for an Indigenous Australian or Indigenous person coming into university. So understanding when we benchmark against success, what are we actually benchmarking against for these students? Because success to them is the bare minimum, is the basics, is not graduating, it's actually getting into uni. For a lot of regional kids, it's something that they dream of. They don't have a lot of people to really look up to get into university. So just even having the opportunity to be able to visit a university, that's a success for them. And so really understanding what success looks like. And when we talk about the roadmap for success, a lot of regional kids, there's no roads out in Pilbara. So you actually need to build the roads for them. And that's where it's got to start, is we talk about this roadmap for success, but where is the road? Because it's invisible to a lot of kids. And if we're talking about building and improving systems, we probably need to start with building the road for them.
Thank you very much. And Tayla?
I want to set a challenge for each of you in the room. So tonight, when you go home and you're brushing your teeth and you're looking at yourself in the mirror, I want you to do some self-reflection and think, how am I engaging with student voice? Am I using my power and influence through my work and through my job to make sure that these young people are being heard? Because I feel like I've met so many influential people, like leaders of student engagement at universities, and they say, oh, so nice to meet you. I barely ever get to speak to students. And I'm like, what? Are you crackers? Like, is that not in your job title? So I want to make sure, even though you might be at the top of your field, that you're still coming back down to the grassroots and chatting with people like us and hearing our stories, because at the end of the day, we are the ones experiencing this in real life.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank, if we can all thank the 4 panellists today. Thank you. It's such an insightful panel and a lot to take away and a lot to process. And thank you, Tayla, for that activity that I think we can all do in terms of what will we do on Monday? What actions will we take from this experience today? So thanks, everyone. I think we have lunch.